Hey everybody, it's Irene with BrainStormAcres. And I was just getting ready to finish up some of my planning for the spring this morning, and I thought I should probably share this. But back to planning. The other day, I showed you guys how to use a seed starting date calculator like we can find at Johnny's. And I told you guys where you could get it and how you pop your zip code into it and things like that, or depends on the calculator. Some of them use a zip code, some of them use your last frost date. But basically, you've got this list now of plants and when they should be planted. So that's great. So how do I use it? Okay, what I do is I literally go down the list. I've got my calendars here. This is my month-by-month calendar that I keep on my desk that just has all of our appointments on it. I also have electronic calendars in my phone and the iPad, and they're all coordinated together and all that kind of good stuff, happy stuff. But I still like a paper calendar that I can just kind of glance at sometimes. And having this right up on top of my desk where I see it every time I walk by helps a lot. It just depends on what you're accustomed to. Some people prefer their calendars hidden, some people like them just on their phone. Do what works for you. But this is how this works for me. I take the seed starting date calculator and I'll flip this over because I'm going to be copying this over anyway. I like my lists to be neat, so if they get messy, I copy them over. I'm one of those. Anyway, so first thing on the list here, artichokes, not growing it this year. Basil. It says number of weeks to start seeds before setting out date, 6. Okay, and it tells me for my location, that means that I should do it sometime after the 10th of April. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a calendar that's just going to be a simple list of months: January, February, March, April, May. Okay? Just literally the words. And then I'm going to say, okay, 10 April, 10 under the April, and I'm going to write down basil. And then I'm going to do that through this entire list. I went through all the veggies in here. Now, this will not have every veggie, because this one is mostly talking about plants that you don't direct seed, although it does have some of the direct seed ones. And I don't know if they've improved that or not. This is a couple of years old. I don't worry about it, because what I do is I go through my calendar here, then I go through my seeds, and I kind of compare and contrast. So I go through and I list, just the way I was showing you here. And I start with the earliest date. There is a late date here that they give too. And the late date is because some plants become more sensitive to heat. And they're concerned about it getting too hot before the plant can come to maturity. So for instance, for broccoli, it says that they recommend you start your seeds inside on the 20th of March. So I would, under March, I would write 20, and then I would write broccoli. Now, the latest they recommend you start them is the 3rd of April. That's because it's going to get warm. Now, last spring, something went wrong, and I don't remember what it was. I think I actually got them in about the right time, but we had an extremely late cold spring, and the ground was frozen in some spots, and I mean, it was just one thing after another. I couldn't get the plants in when I wanted to, so I actually cheated, and I put them in the shade. Now, I recognize that in some parts of the country you can't plant in the shade for vegetables. Here you can, because we're still so darn bright that the plants are going to get plenty of warmth and plenty of light. So I actually planted them in the shade up against a white wall on the north side of the house, and we got broccoli, despite the fact that they went in really late. I want to say they didn't go in. Oh, geez. It says you're supposed to transplant them out starting the 1st of May. And to be honest, by the end of May, sometimes we can be up really in the high 90s, which broccoli doesn't care for particularly. I mean, they can tolerate it to some extent if they're acclimated. But we cheated by putting them in the shade. So, cheat to win, you know. But what I do here, go back to the calendar here, it's going to take 3 days. I go through and I write down every plant that I want to grow. I did all my veggies first, and then I went back later and I did my flowers. And what I wind up with is a messy looking list that, that I copied over to make it less messy, but this one's still messy. And it says February, pots, and there's a list of plants that I want to put in pots. Now, that information only partially came from this calendar. That partially comes from my personal records as to when I put stuff in my greenhouse and stuff before. So what I wind up with is I wind up with a calendar in effect here. February, it says for transplant, start on the 20th, spinach, leeks, onions, and peas. Okay, and because I was messy in the way I organized this, on the 6th, I'm supposed to start dianthus, which is a flower, of course. In March, I wind up with 4 different start dates, the 6th, the 13th, the 20th, and the 27th. And I have the appropriate vegetables and flowers listed to next to each one of those. Now, what this gives me, I can either put it on my paper calendar, I can keep it as a separate calendar, and just do a Monday check-in in terms of what I need to do. You need to do what works for you. If you're the kind of person who can say, okay, it's Monday, I check my calendar, I see what needs to be done for the week. I have a list, I keep a list on my phone of to-dos. Microsoft has a to-do list. That's a rain alert. Okay. It has a to-do list. I know that I saw a blurb the other day that says Google has one too. I'm sure there's lots of different to-do list sort of things out there. Find one that works for you. I know the Google one, I believe, is coordinated to work with the Google Calendar situation. If you're a big Google Calendar fan, get it. But all this does for me is it allows me to have my various lists, for instance, projects, and I can put dates on those if I want to. And Monday, I actually check it every morning, but Monday in particular, I look at what has to be done for the week. Some people do it on Sundays, some people, whatever works for you, figure it out. And now I can look at this and say, okay, if this was February, and this was the week of the 6th of February, if it was the week after the 6th that I was looking at, I'd say, okay, I need to get dianthus seeds started this week. And the week of the 20th, I'd say, okay, I've got to put spinach, leeks, onions, and peas in. Okay. It just gives me a reminder. If I can't get it all done, sometimes I can only say I was really crazy busy the week of the 20th and I managed to get the spinach and the onions in, but I didn't have time for the leeks and the peas. Okay, that gets done as quickly as possible afterwards. Because although it's not like the world's going to explode if you don't get this in time, it's a good idea to get it in when it's supposed to be put in. Don't give up if you miss it. There's been times when I've had things totally go awry and missed a planting date or suddenly realized, wait a minute, I never started this thing or whatever. It happens. But I find this system where I'm looking every month and knowing what I have to plant really helps me. I also will scribble things in the corners, like on this one, it says up here, Lacy Facella. Lacy Facella is a flower, and it can also be used as a ground cover. And we haven't decided when we're going to plant it yet. It is cold hardy down to about 18 degrees. And we do get colder than 18 degrees here. And what we have to decide is, do we want to plant it later in the summer and then let it run as long in the winter or next year as it can? Or what do we want to do? We're going to actually use most, if not all of it, as a ground cover. We're trying to improve a small section of the yard here. We've got some other ground cover we're going to plant that's definitely going to be planted in the summer because that's not a cold tolerant plant. And we're trying to build up a little bit of biomass in there and improve the soil. It's an experiment. We have no idea when it'll work. We have no idea how big a disaster it'll be. But we're going to try it. And Lacey Facella is supposed to be fairly drought tolerant. I'm sure it takes some water to get started because that's just the way seeds work, generally speaking. So I'll often have odd notes tucked on the sides of my things. But in something like this box, it really sticks out every time I look at that paper. And if everything else is nice and neat down the left-hand side where it says February, March, April, and May, now this calendar stops at May. Does that mean I'm going to stop planting things in May? No, probably not. This is just my spring planting. What I've done so far is I've established the basic time frames in which I'm going to start to plant these things. I have double-checked most of my seeds. I'm going to check one more time on a couple of things because I just don't want to screw up. It's already, I noticed the big box store yesterday had their seed racks out and they were really almost tucked away. You have to be paying attention. And I'm always scanning to see what the new stuff is that's come in. So I spotted them right away. But they are just put out. Henry said the other day when he was down there, they were not there. So that's brand new. The regular seed companies are already reporting extra high volumes. I did notice that in the seed racks that were there were almost no flowers. It was almost all vegetables. And that's unusual. Usually it's about 2/3 to 3/4 vegetables and 1/3 to 1/4 flowers. Sometimes over the course of the season it kind of changes. So early it'll be mostly vegetables, but I don't know whether they run out or what, but then they replace it with flowers. Well, there were almost no flowers there. They were just like seeds for veggies, and like right at the very bottom there were just a couple, and I actually did grab some sweet peas. As always, we're exploring new things for the yard. We talked earlier about the fact that we have to redo our irrigation and stuff. So we're hoping to be able to fine-tune some of the flowers in addition to fine-tuning the irrigation. And that's not a bad idea to do both of them at the same time, because that way we know we have enough irrigation for whatever we're planting in an area, and there's nothing worse than having a pretty healthy plant that you set out and you just can't water it enough. This feels very discombobulated this morning. Anyway, I hope that showing you how I use the planner gives you some aid this spring when you're trying to figure out when you need to actually get your seeds started. You can continue to use this even after the dates on here, depending on what you're going to do with it, because it still gives you the number of weeks to start before you want to set something out. So if I was planning, for instance, to grow broccoli for fall, I still need to plant the seeds 4 to 6 weeks before I want to put those plants in the ground. So it's still useful for other times of the year. You just don't rely on the dates because that's just for spring planting. So be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Have a great week, and until next time, bye.